morning, everybody, and welcome back. I'm really excited to be here with you, and I wanted to just let you know that in this first video, I'm going to provide a recap from last week, highlighting some of the important aspects of our reading together on Dina Mengistu's Home at Last. And in the second video, we'll introduce you to this week's week 3 assignments and projects and readings. I hope you had a wonderful Labor Day. I hope that you stayed nice and cool amid all of the nice sunshine and got a chance to go see a cool concert on Sunday afternoon at Ravinia. Bela Fleck was introducing and playing for the band Shakti. So it was really cool. I hadn't been there in a long time, and I hope that you guys had a good chance to enjoy some of the weather, spend time with family and friends, and maybe do something exciting for yourselves as well. I wanted to thank you too for the great work that you've done last week. As we continue to think about our autoethnographies, we're going to be sort of moving on from that project at the end of this week. Our week will follow a Friday and Sunday turn-in schedule because of the holiday, so you don't have to worry about sort of rushing to the assignments right away for tomorrow, Wednesday, but you have extra time. So our first due dates are for this Friday, and then the second set of due dates is for Sunday. I wanted to also point out, I hope you got a chance to see my note from last week about just the importance of using our own personal experience to begin these projects, to work from them as a starting point, a launching place for our projects throughout the rest of the semester. I really liked this article by Sarah Wall. And whether or not you got a chance to read the full article, this particular sentiment about what constitutes a certain kind of knowledge is really important. And I think that all of us drawing from our own experiences, as you'll see in Home at Last, and as you saw in Home at Last, provides us a really important background for understanding all types of cultural issues. She said, although my place as an autoethnographer was unexpected, my involvement in the growth of the method has fit into my career and impacted my work in powerful ways. I discovered autoethnography when I was a doctoral student. Between my master's and PhD, I became an adoptive mother. A mentor told me at that time that I should be careful about spending too much time on, quote, the adoption thing, end quote, since I would not be able to put parenting on my CV. His comments reflected the traditional worldview of the context from which I came. Learning about autoethnography disrupted that perspective to the core as I came to see the power of being guided in my research by my own experience and trusting in both what I had to say and in my right to say it. In 2006, I wrote an article, which is the one I put down here, in which I explored autoethnography in a naive, basic, and wide-eyed way. Through that exploration, I learned that our personal lives and work lives are not bifurcated, and became convinced of the value of starting with personal experience and sociological inquiry. So this particular kind of research is something that is working really well in this field of sociology, but is also a really great way for us to start thinking about what's important to us, what do our life experiences bring to bear on our research interests, and sort of larger influences in society. So with that, let's take a quick look at Dina Mengistu. As you're continuing work on your autoethnographies this week, we're going to be thinking about the readings this semester as a way of modeling certain kinds of thinking. And so this Home at Last is a really excellent idea, excellent writing that exhibits how we can talk about our personal experience and do so with a particularly pointed purpose. For Dina Mengistu, this purpose is sort of sketched out in the title, Home at Last. What exactly does it mean to be home? And does Mengistu, the speaking voice in this essay, make it to a place where he's comfortable and can call it a place of his own, a home at last? That's a question that we're continually thinking as we read through this work. Now, before I highlight a few of your really appropriate comments, really astute comments and conversations, one of the things that you're probably thinking as you're drafting your autoethnography is, where do I start? How do I progress through the writing. And so one of the things I'd like to point out to you is a sort of progression of argument in Home at Last. And there are kind of 2 or 3 different ways that we can think about this particular writing beginning and ending. It's both organized by a chronology of time, right? At 21, I moved to Brooklyn. He begins by talking about where he moved, but then goes back in time. He talks about where he left, where he grew up, and then kind of brings us forward to the present, what exactly he's doing now, where he moved, and how he found his way there. So that's kind of an interesting way to think about progression too, in terms of chronology, in terms of age, kind of looking back on one's upbringing and then bringing us fast forwarding to the present. He also, of course, organizes these experiences by means of theme, talking about ways in which he didn't belong, identity and origin as being at odds with the places that he lived and the people that he was surrounded by, up to a more comfortable place where he is sort of at a place of belonging. And some of us might argue that, how much does he actually feel like he belongs is something that we are still questioning when he talks about being a foreigner and tourist in Kensington. So some things to think about, but mostly this idea that we do get a sense that he's more happy in this final place in Kensington as he leaves his readers to think about those final words. I stood on that corner night after night for the most obvious of reasons, to be reminded of a way of life that persists regardless of context, to feel, however foolishly, that I too was attached to something. So we also might think about this writing as a movement between being unattached to being attached to a particular location. To go along with some of these thematic movements and chronological movements, there are very specific kinds of details that Mengistu brings to light in order to sort of undergird that particular purpose of movement. For example, there's a large and heavy emphasis on the ways in which prepositions are used throughout his writing. So you see something like, I simply am Ethiopian without the necessary from that serves as the final assurance of our identity and origin. So kind of an emphasis on where he's going to, where he's from, and that's something that really sort of motivates a lot of the ideas that run through this essay. You'll also see a lot of language of movement, and that's something I think I made a note of. So always kind of watch for any kinds of notes I leave or your peers leaves. Always important to linger over place in this writing where home is mentioned as well. So any kinds of important words in a title. And so these are kind of just strategies I'm working through here. I'm just pointing out as I read through some of these readings with you, which is so much fun for me. Where do we see the language of movement? We see it everywhere. He talks about movement in terms of how his father sort of copes with grief as he walked or whistled the tunes of Homeric songs that I had never known. He always walked with both hands firmly clasped behind his back, as if in grief, transformed into something real and physical could be grasped and secured in the palms of his hands. And later when Mengistu moves to Kensington, he does the same thing where he's pacing the blocks, but maybe not necessarily in reference to feeling a particular kind of grief, maybe more in the sense of exploration. Kaliu said, I think the author was trying to say that at that moment, he knew what it's like to be alone, regardless of where he is or where you are with it. Like you're in that state of mind that your mental health can be caused by life-changing adoptions and poor self-esteem. Not adoptions, I'm sorry, adaptations and poor self-esteem. Nima, you said, Mengistu speaks of a sense of longing and loss he saw in his parents and how he too had a sense of loss, even though he was still trying to fit in and figure out where he belonged, or even fit in. And Nikta, you said, I think this piece of literature has a lot of depth because it really instills how depersonalized the author is and shows how he doesn't know about his own culture at this time, bringing him to not know a part of himself. And with no way to gain that culture, he feels lost and a bit empty, while also constantly being reminded of this loss just by looking at his mother. Good, absolutely. And so we have this huge gap here then, this sort of distinction between what is happening prior in his life with his family to what he does later in his life as he moves into Kensington. And so in your own writing, you can think about the place of actual physical gaps in your writing to signify a kind of shift in time, a shift in an idea or purpose. And that's where we have an actual publication itself has a kind of wide gap between these two movements. As Mengistu experiences Kensington, I also asked us to think a little bit about this feature of voice. How do we express a certain sentiment by not just saying I felt sad or this place was great, but actually by showing us with specific details. For example, Kensington was no more beautiful by night than by day, and perhaps this very absence of grandeur allowed me to feel more at ease wandering its streets at night. Lamoni, you did such a nice job of sharing kind of your reaction, but then also drawing specific details and quoting directly from the text. He said, here I noticed that there was a sense of change in tone to this piece, as Mengistu was describing the feeling of being more at ease wandering the streets at night. The choice of words signify, in earlier paragraphs, a feeling of the opposite of ease. Instead, there was, quote, a self-conscious reenactment, or, quote, covered all streets, and first attempt at assimilation. It's evident that he now feels more comfort and a new sense of belonging as the description of his surroundings have changed to a more positive one. In the following paragraph, he describes the nights as warm, painting a picture for the reader and continuing setting the dip tone for the rest of this piece. Morelli, you said, I agree. It's very interesting how his tone changes. I think in the beginning he was so stuck on the fact that he never got to fully embrace and experience his culture, and throughout the piece he clearly starts to feel a sense of home in ways he never thought he could define that feeling, and the tone distinctly changes to become more positive and hopeful. Absolutely. So thank you so much for kind of not only reading carefully in terms of what's happening with plot, but then also looking more deeply in terms of how his experiences shift, and his tone shifts from maybe more negative to a more positive, uplifting, and hopeful encounter with this new place. Thank you so much for these comments from last week. I always enjoy kind of seeing how you're interacting and responding to one another. Some of you are posing questions, which is really helpful, I think, for others to sort of respond to as the initial comment, and then allows those replies to sort of formulate throughout the week. Thank you also for kind of talking about and meditating on this idea of voice, and the chronology and progression of, ideas in general. How carefully we look and how carefully we read this writing is how carefully we're going to be writing as writers. It's sort of a reciprocal exercise. So thank you again. What I like to do is to take these readings and then put them against like our rubric for class, thinking about our own projects. So thinking about our autoethnographies and the genre written in first person, though it doesn't have to always be first person, analyzes a personal account and includes an enabling figure. This is our rubric for the projects that we're turning in this week. Dino Mengistu uses a personal account, and he has a few enabling figures, different characters in the story, including his family, and including the crew at his restaurant, who gives him extra food, and also his landlord, who allows him a place to rent. The purpose clearly portrays how he or she is othered or made different or an outsider. I think that's pretty clear throughout this writing, in terms of both being an outsider because of the way that, and from where he's from, being an outsider in terms of his profession, being a writer and always sort of on the outs, looking in. He takes a book and pretends to read in a restaurant while he's sort of a watcher. And what does that mean in terms of how he's inside or outside? He's also on the outside and inside depending upon where he's living. So there's lots of different ways in which he kind of layers this sort of levels of being included or excluded. And then sort of explains to his readers where he's coming from, uses very specific details, the restaurants he sees, the food that he's eating, the friends that he's imagining he would get together in terms of this writing. So thank you so much for reading this writing with me. I hope that you enjoyed his essay, and I can't wait to start week 3 with you. Thanks so much for listening.